What would you do if the man you mocked turned out to be the one who owned everything you stood on? This is not just a story about arrogance. It's a lesson about respect. Because sometimes the person you disrespect in minutes can change your life forever. The arrival, it was a stormy Friday night in Atlanta. Rain lashed against the glistening windows of the Grand Royale Hotel, one of the most prestigious luxury hotels in the city. Inside, the lobby buzzed with wealthy businessmen, celebrities, and tourists taking selfies under the golden chandeliers. At the front desk stood James Parker, the manager on duty. Sharp suit, arrogant smile, and eyes that judged every guest who walked through the revolving doors. He prided himself on knowing who belonged and who didn't. And that night, as fate would have it, his pride was about to be tested. The door swung open. A man in his mid-40s stepped inside, dripping wet from the rain. He wore a simple black hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers. No luggage, no driver, no fancy watch. He looked ordinary. Too ordinary for a hotel that charged $2,000 a night. His name, David Cole. But nobody knew him. Nobody knew that behind those simple clothes was a man worth over $300 million, the CEO of a global real estate empire, and the secret owner of the Grand Royale Hotel itself. First impressions, David walked up to the counter, smiling politely. "Good evening. I'd like a room, please, just for the night." Manager James looked him up and down, eyes narrowing. "Do you have a reservation?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. "No," David replied calmly. "I was passing through and thought I'd stop here." "I can pay up front if needed," James forced a laugh, glancing at his colleagues. "Sir, this is a five-star establishment. Our rooms are not cheap. Perhaps you should try a motel down the street. This isn't the kind of place for everyone." The words stung like knives, but David stayed calm. "I assure you I can afford it." "Please, just book me a room." James leaned closer, whispering so other guests couldn't hear. "Listen, don't embarrass yourself. We don't want your type hanging around here. You'll make the other guests uncomfortable." The staff snickered. One of them even muttered, "Probably homeless, trying to stay dry." The humiliation, David's heart pounded, not because he was angry, but because he had experienced this too many times before. People judged him by his skin color, by his clothes, by what they thought he didn't have. He took a deep breath. "I'll ask you one last time. Will you give me a room?" James smirked. "No, we don't serve people like you. Please leave before I call security." The lobby fell silent. Guests glanced over, curious about the commotion. To them, it was just another scene of a poor man being turned away from wealth. Nobody questioned it. Nobody stepped in. David looked around the marble lobby, the golden elevator doors, the giant portrait of the hotel's founder on the wall. He knew every inch of this building. After all, he was the one who bought it years ago when it was drowning in debt. He had rebuilt it, expanded it, and turned it into one of the most profitable hotels in the state. And yet here he was, denied entry at his own property. The calm. Before the storm, David slowly smiled, a smile that confused the staff. Instead of leaving, he pulled out his phone. "Are you sure you don't want to reconsider?" he asked softly. James crossed his arms. "I'm sure. Now leave." With that, David dialed a number. "Mr. Cole here," he said firmly. "I'm at the Grand Royale. Gather the board of directors and meet me in the lobby. Immediately." The staff exchanged puzzled glances. Who was this man? Within minutes, black cars began pulling up outside. Men and women in tailored suits hurried into the lobby, whispering urgently into their phones. The atmosphere shifted. Something was happening. Something big. James frowned. "What is this? Who are you?" David turned, his calm voice echoing through the lobby. "You'll find out soon enough." 9 minutes later. Exactly 9 minutes later, the entire executive team of the hotel chain stood in front of him. They shook his hand with respect, addressed him as Mr. Cole, and waited for his instructions. The staff's jaws dropped. James felt his throat tighten. This couldn't be real. David Cole, the man they mocked, the man they turned away, was not only a millionaire, he was their ultimate boss, the secret owner of the hotel, the man who signed their paychecks. The lobby was silent as David turned to face the employees who had humiliated him. His eyes no longer held calmness. They held fire. "I came here tonight as a guest," he began, his voice steady but powerful. "I asked for a simple room. Not free, not charity. I offered to pay, and yet you judged me. You mocked me. You denied me dignity. In a hotel that I own," James stuttered, sweat dripping down his face. Sir, I didn't know." "That's the problem," David cut him off. "You never know. You never see. You look at people and decide their worth in seconds. But let me remind you, the success of this hotel doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from respect, from service, from humility. And tonight, you failed that." The verdict guests watched in stunned silence as David turned to the security chief. "Escort the entire front desk staff out. They're fired. Effective immediately." Gasps filled the room. James begged, falling to his knees. "Please, Mr. Cole, I have a family. I didn't mean—" David's eyes hardened. "And how many families have you disrespected in this lobby? How many guests walked away humiliated because of you? You didn't care about them then. Don't expect me to care now." The staff were escorted out, heads hanging in shame. The guests, once silent, now erupted in applause. Some cheered. Some even cried. They had just witnessed justice, raw, immediate, and unforgettable. David stood tall, his presence commanding. "This hotel," he declared, "will no longer be a place of judgment. It will be a place of dignity for every guest, no matter how they look, no matter what they wear. Respect will be our true luxury." And with that, he finally checked himself into the finest suite in the building, not as the owner, but as a guest who had earned his own respect. The applause in the lobby echoed in David Cole's mind long after he entered his private suite. He had stood up for himself, yes, but more importantly, he had stood up for every single person who had ever been denied respect because of how they looked. But as he stood by the window, gazing down at the glowing city lights, his thoughts drifted back to his past, the very reason he had disguised himself tonight. A childhood of struggles. David Cole was not born into wealth. Far from it. He grew up in a small, crumbling apartment on the south side of Chicago. His father worked long hours at a factory, and his mother cleaned houses just to put food on the table. From a young age, David understood what it meant to be invisible. He remembered the stares when his mother wore her faded uniform on the bus, the whispers from classmates when he brought free lunch coupons to school, the humiliation of being turned away from restaurants that didn't want people like him, but his mother's words always stayed with him. "Son, people may judge you by what you wear, but never let them define who you are. Respect is earned by heart, not by suit." Those words became his fire. His first encounter with discrimination. Years later, as a young man, David applied for an internship at a luxury hotel. He wore his best, a borrowed shirt, scuffed shoes polished with cooking oil, and a smile that tried to hide his nerves. But before the interview even began, the manager looked him up and down and said, "We don't think you'd fit our image." David never forgot the sting of those words. They weren't rejecting his skills, his ambition, his drive. They were rejecting him, his existence. That night, he sat on a park bench, tears in his eyes. And there, he made a promise to himself. "One day, I won't just work at a hotel. I'll own one. And when I do, no guest will ever feel the way I felt today." The rise life was not easy. He worked 3 jobs while studying at community college: janitor at a diner, delivery boy for a grocery store, and night shift at a gas station. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, but he was relentless. Every paycheck, every dollar saved was invested into books on business, finance, and real estate. While others partied, David studied. His big break came when he convinced a small group of investors to trust him with a broken-down property. Everyone laughed. "That building is worthless," they said. But David saw potential. He spent every waking hour renovating it, painting walls, fixing plumbing, even laying tiles himself. Within 2 years, that property became a thriving apartment complex. From there, he flipped another, and another. By the time he turned 40, David Cole wasn't just successful, he was a millionaire. By 45, he was a CEO, leading one of the fastest-growing real estate companies in America, and eventually, he bought the crown jewel of his dreams, the Grand Royale Hotel. Why the disguise? Most owners lived far away from their properties, visiting only for board meetings. But David was different. He wanted to know how guests were truly treated, not just what managers reported. So from time to time, he disguised himself. No flashy suits. No Rolex, no limo. Just an ordinary man. He wanted to test his staff, to see whether they valued human dignity over appearances. Tonight's visit was one of those tests. But the result cut deeper than he expected. Back to the present sitting in his suite, David replayed every word spoken to him that evening. "We don't serve people like you. Try a motel down the street." His fists clenched. Not because he was insulted, but because those words were likely spoken to many before him. Guests without millions. Guests who genuinely needed kindness. And suddenly he realized this wasn't just about firing a few arrogant staff members. This was about transforming the entire culture of the hotel, a vision for change. The next morning, David called for a meeting with the entire hotel staff. The ballroom was filled with waiters, housekeepers, bellboys, and managers, some curious, some nervous, and some still unaware of what had happened the night before. He stepped onto the stage, no suit, no tie, just his simple clothes. But when he spoke, the room went silent. "Last night," he began, "I came to this hotel as a guest. Not as your CEO, not as your boss, just as a man seeking a room. And what I faced was not service. It was judgment, disrespect, prejudice." Gasps echoed in the room. Some staff exchanged guilty glances. "I want you all to understand something," David continued. "This hotel is not built on gold ceilings or expensive chandeliers. It is built on people, on every guest who walks through these doors. Whether they wear designer suits or old jackets, whether they arrive in limousines or on foot, every one of them deserves respect." His voice grew stronger. "If you cannot see beyond appearances, if you cannot treat every guest with dignity, then you do not belong here. Because as of today, this hotel will stand for one thing above all else: respect, the impact." The room erupted in applause. Some staff members had tears in their eyes. For years, many of them had also felt belittled by arrogant managers like James. David's words lit a fire in their hearts. That day, policies were rewritten. Training programs were launched. A new culture was born at the Grand Royale, one where kindness was luxury and respect was the brand. Guests began to notice the change. Reviews poured in, praising not just the beauty of the hotel, but the warmth of the people. Bookings skyrocketed, and David Cole proved that humanity was the greatest investment of all. The ballroom still buzzed with murmurs after David Cole's powerful speech. Housekeepers whispered to one another, waiters nodded with tears in their eyes, and even the chefs standing in the back clapped softly. For many, it was the first time a CEO had looked them in the eye and spoken about dignity, not profits. But at the far end of the room stood James Harlow, the hotel's front desk manager. The same man who, just the night before, had sneered at David's worn-out jacket and told him to try the cheap motel down the street. James's face was pale, his jaw clenched. He had no idea the man he had humiliated was the owner. And now the truth hit him like a thunderbolt. The CEO calls him out. David scanned the room, his sharp eyes settling on James. The applause faded, and silence washed over the crowd. "James," David said, his voice calm but commanding, "would you like to join me up here?" The manager froze. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. He swallowed hard, but his legs moved as if pulled by invisible strings. Slowly, he walked up to the stage, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "Do you remember me?" David asked quietly, but every word carried. James stammered, "Sir, I didn't realize." "That's exactly the point," David interrupted, his tone sharp as a blade. "You didn't realize. You didn't care." The audience held its breath. "Last night, you didn't see a human being. You saw a jacket. You saw skin. You saw someone you thought wasn't worthy of this hotel. And so you denied them. Not because the hotel was full. Not because of policy. But because of your prejudice. James's face flushed red. His mouth opened, then closed. There was no excuse he could give. The humiliation. For the first time in his career, James felt powerless. He had built his life on arrogance, barking orders at staff, smiling only at wealthy guests, and treating anyone beneath him like dirt. Now, in front of everyone, the truth stood naked. I built this hotel, David continued, his voice rising with emotion, so that people would feel welcome, no matter where they came from, no matter what they wore. And yet last night, I discovered that the very person meant to lead my staff was the one who disgraced everything this hotel should stand for. Gasps filled the room. James lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The firing. You are hereby terminated, David said, his tone final. Effective immediately. A hush fell. James's jaw dropped. He had expected anger, maybe a lecture, but not this. Not in front of everyone. Sir, please. He pleaded, desperation dripping from his voice. I've given this hotel 10 years of my life. I can change. Give me another chance. David paused, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned closer, his words a whisper only James could hear, but the silence in the room made every syllable echo. I gave you a chance last night, he said, and you showed me who you truly are. Security stepped forward. James, trembling, gathered his things and walked out of the ballroom. For once, the man who used to strut with arrogance left with his head bowed in shame. The staff's relief, as the door closed behind James, the ballroom erupted, not in gossip, but in applause. The staff had suffered under his leadership for years. Many had been yelled at, humiliated, and even reduced to tears by him. Now, for the first time, they felt seen. Protected. David raised a hand, silencing the applause. Let this be a reminder, he said. Leadership is not about power. It is about service. If you cannot serve with respect, you cannot lead. His words struck deep, not just into the hearts of the staff, but also into the hotel's very foundation. A new kind of training later that week. David implemented a new program, the Guest Experience Test. Every month, staff members would be judged not on how quickly they checked in a VIP, but on how warmly they treated someone who appeared to have nothing. Mystery guests, disguised actors, sometimes even David himself, would arrive looking tired, shabby, or different. The staff's reactions would decide their future in the company. No longer would promotions be given based on favoritism or seniority. From now on, kindness was currency. An unexpected visit. One evening, about a month later, David was walking through the lobby when he spotted a familiar figure standing awkwardly near the entrance. It was James, but he didn't look the same. His expensive suit was gone. His hair was unkempt. His shoulders sagged. He looked like a man who had lost everything. Security moved to escort him out, but David raised a hand. Let him speak. James stepped forward, his eyes brimming with shame. Mr. Cole, he said softly, I wanted to apologize. You were right. I judged people by their clothes, their wallets, their skin. I thought respect was something only the rich deserved. But losing this job, it made me realize how wrong I was. David studied him carefully. Was this real remorse or just desperation? James continued, his voice trembling. I've been looking for work everywhere. Nobody will hire me. I used to think I was better than everyone. Now I'd be grateful just to carry someone's bags. A choice to make for the first time. The man who had humiliated countless guests stood humbled. Broken. David thought back to his mother's words. Respect is earned by heart, not by suit. Here was his chance to live by those words. He could easily turn James away. It would be justice. But would it be right? James, David said slowly, this hotel does not need managers who bark orders. It needs people who understand humility. If you're truly ready to learn, I'll give you one chance. But not as a manager, James blinked. Then as what? David's lips curved into the faintest smile. As a bellboy. You'll start where respect begins, carrying bags, opening doors, serving guests. If you can learn humility there, maybe one day you'll rise again. The entire lobby froze. James, once the powerful manager, reduced to the lowest position in the hotel. But instead of anger, James nodded. Tears slipped down his cheeks. "Thank you, sir. I won't waste this chance, the lesson." And so James began his new journey, not as a manager, but as a servant. Guests who once feared his arrogance now found him quietly carrying their bags, bowing politely and whispering apologies when he made mistakes. For the first time in his life, he understood what David had been teaching all along. True respect comes not from power, but from humility. And David? He didn't just build hotels. He built people. The weeks turned into months. The Cole Grand Hotel no longer felt like the same place it once was. The atmosphere had shifted from cold efficiency to genuine warmth. Guests wrote glowing reviews not because of the chandeliers or luxury cars outside, but because of how the staff treated them. Every good evening, every welcome back, was filled with real sincerity. The staff had learned the lesson David Cole wanted them to know. Hospitality wasn't about serving the rich, it was about serving humanity. But the biggest change was in a man no one expected. James. The bellboy James, once the arrogant front desk manager, now wore the simple uniform of a bellboy. His white gloves carried luggage instead of signing papers. His polished shoes walked the lobby floor, not behind a polished desk. At first, some guests recognized him and mocked. "Weren't you the manager?" One laughed. James bowed his head, his voice steady. "I was, but I have more to learn now than I did then." He opened car doors, carried heavy bags, and even stayed late to help housekeepers clean. Slowly, his pride melted away. For the first time in years, he slept at night without bitterness in his heart. The staff who once feared him now began to respect him. He apologized to those he had wronged, and though some were slow to forgive, his humility softened their hearts. David's silent watch. David Cole watched all of this quietly. He never announced James's story to the world. To him, this wasn't about humiliation, it was about transformation. One evening, David's mother's portrait hung in his private office caught his eye. Her words rang in his ears again. Respect is earned by heart, not by suit. David smiled. For the first time, he felt he was truly honoring her memory. The VIP guest one winter evening. The hotel was buzzing with excitement. A major business delegation was arriving, investors from overseas who could bring billions into future expansions. The pressure was immense. Every staff member polished the floors, checked the lights, and prepared the suites. As the black cars pulled up, staff lined up to greet the guests. Among them stood James, carrying luggage as quickly and carefully as possible. But when one of the investors stepped out, chaos erupted. A suitcase ripped open, papers scattered across the driveway, and cameras flashed. The investors panicked. This could have been a disaster. But James immediately knelt, gathering the documents with care. Instead of calling for others, he shielded the papers from the wind, held them firmly, and reassured the guests with calm, respectful words. "Please don't worry. Nothing is lost. Welcome to the Cole Grand. Your comfort is our priority." The guests, who had expected panic, were stunned by his composure. David, watching from the lobby, felt a strange swell of pride. James had changed, truly changed. The redemption later that night, David called James into his office. The atmosphere was heavy, like something important was about to happen. "James," David said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been watching you. Do you know what I've seen?" James lowered his eyes. "A broken man trying to fix himself?" David shook his head. "No. I've seen a man who learned the hardest lesson of all, humility. You once thought leadership was about power. But tonight, you showed me it's about service." James's throat tightened. He didn't know whether to cry or bow. "You started as a manager who looked down on others," David continued. "Then you became a bellboy who lifted others up." "That's leadership," James whispered. "Sir, I don't deserve forgiveness." David leaned forward, his eyes soft. "Forgiveness is earned, and you've been earning it every day since that night. So here's my decision." James's heart pounded. I'm promoting you, David said slowly. Not back to manager, but to guest relations director. From now on, you'll train others on how to treat people with respect. The lesson you learned the hard way. Tears streamed down James's face. He had fallen from power, been humiliated, but now he was being lifted again, this time not by arrogance, but by grace. The hotel's new legacy, the Cole Grand, became famous, not for its marble floors or Michelin star restaurant, but for its story. Guests whispered about the hotel where the CEO once disguised himself, the place where arrogance was fired and humility was rewarded. Travel magazines wrote articles, "The Hotel That Tests Humanity." Videos went viral showing staff helping lost children, carrying luggage for the elderly, and welcoming guests with genuine kindness. And at the heart of it all was James, now standing proudly at the entrance, not as a guard of luxury, but as a guardian of respect. The final twist one quiet night, as the hotel lights dimmed, David stood on the rooftop terrace, gazing at the city below. James approached him silently, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Sir," James said softly, handing him one, "I don't know how to thank you." David took the cup, smiling faintly. "By never forgetting who you once were?" James nodded. "I won't." Then David turned, his voice low but firm. "Do you know why I disguised myself that night?" James hesitated. "To test me?" David shook his head. "No, to test everyone. I wanted to see if the spirit of this hotel had survived. I wanted to know if people here valued wealth more than humanity. You failed me that night, James, but you've redeemed yourself since." James's eyes glistened. "And what did you learn, sir?" David's gaze drifted toward the horizon. That no matter how high we climb, we are all judged not by the suits we wear, but by the way we treat those we think are beneath us. The night was silent, but those words echoed forever. Epilogue months later, guests entering the Cole Grand would often see a strange sight. The CEO himself, sometimes dressed in ordinary clothes, sometimes helping bellboys, sometimes sweeping the lobby floor. When asked why, David would always answer the same: because respect is not given from the top down. It's lived every single day. And so the hotel stood, not just as a monument of luxury, but as a living story. A place where the powerful could fall, the humble could rise, and everyone was reminded that dignity was the greatest service of all.